The Florence of the 1470s was teeming with brilliant thinkers, astronomers, geographers, philosophers, and musicians, and in all history there was no better time to be a painter. Young Leonardo da Vinci's profession put him in the midst of the most elite circles, but he was only one of Florence's exceptional painters. Botticelli, Ghirlandaio, and Raphael were among those competing with Leonardo for commissions. And Leonardo's ever-roving curiosity made it nearly impossible for him to concentrate on painting. He thrilled in the explosion of ideas and began scribbling in a notebook wherever he went.
Leonardo write down all ideas he have, or things he has just read or heard in the street, with friends. And sometimes it's quite difficult to know if it's his idea or just quotations that he's making.
Leonardo's notes run the gamut from simple sketches to notes on subjects ranging from light and shade to paleontology to submarine warfare. Yet for all the 20 volumes with hundreds of pages of notes, Leonardo left us surprisingly few clues about his personal life. But they are certainly rich with information about how his mind worked.
The notebooks are fragmentary, they're contradictory. There are all sorts of materials that are on vastly different subjects, sometimes even on the very same page. And they are the absolute antithesis of the sort of notes that you as a good student took at college. He simply was not inclined to be a systematic thinker.
One of the greatest mysteries of Leonardo da Vinci is his handwriting. Nearly every single note he ever wrote was backwards, written from right to left, so one would need a mirror to read it. This led many to think Leonardo had something to hide.
The fact of the matter is, if you're left-handed, which I am, the normal way you would try to write is from right to left. You don't push a pen, you pull a pen. And it's perfectly possible that he developed this because he didn't have a nasty first-grade teacher to keep him from doing otherwise.
Leonardo would follow people into taverns, brothels, and even the gallows, sketching their faces for a series of caricatures known as the grotesques.
It's very clear in Leonardo also that contrast is how you know things. In other words, to know the beautiful, you must know the ugly, and vice versa. What the grotesques are probably most basically about are looking at the variety of possibility in the biological world. There's actually one sheet where he compares a horse's head to a man's head, to a lion's head.
If the painter wishes to see beauties that would enrapture him, he is the master of their production. And if he wishes to see monstrous things which might terrify, or which would be buffoonish and laughable or truly pitiable, he is their Lord and God.
It's clear from Leonardo's notebooks that his ideal of beauty emphasizes the male body, which he spent hours and hours sketching. His sketches also betray poor knowledge of the female anatomy. And in all his notebooks, there are almost no indications of relationships with women. This has led scholars to conclude that Leonardo was probably homosexual.
It is likely that he had some kind of relationship with men, but in the context of an artist shop in the 15th century, that probably would not have been such a remarkable thing. Leonardo often spoke very disdainfully of the procreative act.
The act of coupling and the members engaged in it are so ugly that if it were not for the faces and adornments of the actors and the impulses sustained, the human race would die out.
Over 400 years later, Sigmund Freud ventured a famous analysis of Leonardo's sexuality based on a childhood memory found in the artist's notebooks. He claimed that it was unlikely that Leonardo had ever embraced a woman in passion. Early in 1476, when he was 24 years old, Leonardo faced the darkest moment in his life. He was brought before the Florence court of law and publicly charged with sodomy. The accusation had been made anonymously to Florence's so-called officers of the night, or morals police. The charges were apparently dropped for lack of proof, but for Leonardo, the public humiliation was excruciating. His 1480 painting of St. Jerome perhaps reflects that pain, the thin, anguished saint beating his breast with a stone in the desert. In addition to pouring emotional power into this painting, Leonardo showed how precisely he could paint the human anatomy. And he gave the painting a realistic visual perspective, something he chided his fellow painters for ignoring. One friend he criticized was Sandro Botticelli. Here in The Birth of Venus, Botticelli's figures float as if against a backdrop and lack the third dimension that Leonardo valued so much. Leonardo may have been way ahead of his fellow painters, but he was becoming less popular with the more influential patrons of Florence. The fact was that Botticelli was one of several painters who were virtually eclipsing Da Vinci. Leonardo was nearly 30 in 1481 when Lorenzo de' Medici got a request from the Vatican to send Florence's best painters to Rome to decorate the new Sistine Chapel. Botticelli was chosen, along with almost all of the other leading Florentine artists, but Leonardo was left out. This was undoubtedly a crushing humiliation. Leonardo was clearly a master, but he was considered unreliable. His interest could not be confined to the canvas, and more often than not, he failed to finish his assignments. In March of 1481, a small church outside of Florence engaged Leonardo to paint an altarpiece representing the Adoration of the Magi. He must have been badly in need of work to sign a contract so unfavorable to him. He had to pay for his own supplies, and if he failed to finish in 30 months, he would forfeit the painting and his pay. Given this ambitious composition, Leonardo must have known he could never finish in time, and he didn't. But he broke new ground with the work, and even his rivals, including Ghirlandaio, Botticelli, and Raphael, stood before this painting in wonder.
It's such a revolutionary art. You can see all the new art that Leonardo is inventing. Probably it was even too new for himself. And he left it unfinished, yet it's probably the first really modern painting of the time.
The triangular structure of the foreground group becomes an absolute principle of high Renaissance art. The emphasis on diversity, the old, the young, the bald, the bearded, the idea that he states later in his notebooks that you should paint a figure from the bones outward. If you look on the right side of the picture, there is an elderly man, and you would swear it's a skull.
Near the edge, Leonardo painted a young man, his head turned away from the infant Christ. It is said to be Leonardo portraying himself as very much the outsider. 1481 had been a miserable year for Leonardo. Wounded by his public trial, bitter at being passed over, he turned away from Florence to pursue a new life beyond its walls and challenges beyond the skills of a mere painter.